So, yeah, thank you for joining the road session. And what we're going to look at today is just going through an example about how to calculate reference results within AERIUS. As you see, Jess is in the room with us as well, and she'll be on hand to answer any questions that you've got about the tool functionality. If there's any questions, can you keep them in the chat, please? Jess, I think, is going to try and answer as we go, and if there's time at the end, we can pick them up and have a discussion. So what we're going to do in this session then is initially we'll just work through how to load a road source into AERIUS and then how you would analyse outputs. So this session is just going to focus on basically going through the details of the user interface. And if you're joining in session 2, then we'll build upon session 1 and have a look at how to actually analyse the impact of a road assessment scheme. If you've got any feedback as well, or any suggestions for things that could be covered on Wednesday, then please just let us know. Can someone confirm you can see the screen before I get started?
Can I just ask a question? Sorry to interrupt. I mean, given the audience is Ben and myself who are sort of involved with the project, and other than that, it's only Andy and Stephen. Is this going to answer their questions that they're going to have this demonstration? Because that's obviously already we have a series of questions that they are asking. Are they going to be addressed in this session, do we think?
I don't think so, because my questions are not about how you use an air quality model. Mine are much more fundamental of what is the point of this system, quite frankly. And because I know you just joined and I keep asking this question, you never answer it, but you've just created a front end to ADMS. Wow. That's all you've done. We do all this. It doesn't line up with DMRB. It's not going to line up with the new NE guidance that we're just drafting. What's the point?
It does include a lot more than just acting as a front end to ADMS. It pulls in all of the habitats information that you normally have to go to APIS to get. It has that mapped out. The results are plotted in terms of impacts on CL, both as a process contribution, a scenario contribution, and in combination process contribution. So that would all have to be done through some sort of post-processing step. So that offers a lot of functionality that doesn't exist for most users outside of a system like this, although I recognize some places may have their own post-processing tools for that. It does also include some other data sets and information that, again, you'd have to go to other sources to get. Background maps for pollutants are built in. The NOx to NO2 calculator is also built in. Emission factor toolkits and things like that are also built in. People may or may not choose to use them, but it does pull together a lot more than just being a front-end user interface for ADMS.
Can I add to that as well? That conceptually, I don't know where in the planning this is, but AERIUS register would obviously add a lot of additional functionality in terms of letting us know what else is in the pipeline. And also, I think looking at how it's been used in the Netherlands, I think it has definitely added value from a regulator's point of view in terms of being able to QA and understand work that applicants have done without being an expert modeler. So it has allowed reviewers so the permitting officers to understand the modeling that's been done. I won't say that has gone flawlessly, but it has definitely provided a valuable tool to them.
You could have done all that without AERIUS.
Not sure about that, Andy, but I think that is a good discussion to have at some point. But I think that I understand where you're coming from, and I know a lot of people are interested in register and the in combination archive, and that is a different work stream that's trying to work in parallel. But at the first instance, we're trying to make sure that the calculator works well enough and it actually does the sums correctly to allow people to have some confidence in the calculations that are produced. But at the same time, we are beginning to develop the concepts of the register and the in combination archive to help regulators and assessors and decision makers in that part of the assessments that they need to do.
Sorry, this was my you joined us as I interrupted, Nicola. So it's my apologies. But but I just pointed out that obviously Ben, myself, Ricardo's team, and yourself are all part of the project team, so have a reasonable understanding in terms of case study. We all tested it, so it's for Andy and Stephen's benefit this session, and so it's just we're trying. I know Andy has some specific questions. Obviously, the chat ones he put in before. Just trying to understand how we're going to address those in this demonstration. Is it just a walkthrough for that, or are we going to try and engage and address some of those things as we go through as well? Because there's a very small audience in this. It's not the same as the other.
So, sorry, can I just correct Kieran? I would say I was hoping that this was for my benefit as well. I was was hoping to understand some details of how to use the model.
I think as this session is being recorded, and the idea is that this these demonstration sessions are guidance materials for the people who are doing the case studies and potentially for use in future training materials. I think there would be merit in going through it starting at a basic level so that those recordings are there for people to reference. Recognizing that this is a bit of an advanced audience for some of the material that we will be covering. So apologies for that. We will address your questions in the chat, at least as we go along, depending on the time after the core demo has finished. But then we may have some more time for discussions. But I think it would be useful to create that that sort of a demonstration video for people to refer to later on.
Should we stop the recording and start again? Then you can have a nice.
We can
starting
edit.
point.
We can edit accordingly.
I can edit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So then I'm going to go on mute as well.
Okay, I will jump back in then. Okay, can you still see my screen? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so yes, this is going to be quite a high-level overview of the AERIUS product, and we'll be looking at what do each of the buttons do and how to go about adding a hypothetical road reference scenario. So starting off, the screen you can see is the screen that you'll be welcomed when you load the website, and this is the home screen on the AERIUS calculator. So before getting into the nitty-gritty, I'll just point out some of the general features of the model. As Mark mentioned in the main session, there's a feedback button on the right-hand side. If you've got any comments, suggestions, any bugs, then please provide details of those along with your screenshots in this feedback tool, and that will be submitted to the development team who can then get back to you with a resolution. The menu on the left-hand side shows which stage of the process that you're currently at. So for example, we've got our homepage, then input, assessment points, calculation, jobs, results, and exports. So that's the workflow for the process. And at the bottom left of the screen, we've got some more additional options. So for example, the preferences menu that Mark's already described in the main session, where you've got options to set your import mode as advanced or standard. And you can automatically choose to turn layers on and off depending on which part of the process you're at. So normally I use the automatic layers and keep them turning on and off. And that just means as I click through the menu, the correct things are shown on the map that we'll see shortly. We also have a button that describes hotkeys. These are a really useful addition, especially when you start to use AERIUS more regularly. So these are just shortcuts that can be used to quickly add receptor points, for example. Finally, you've got information to take you to the AERIUS webpage, the quick start document, or you can change your language between English and Netherlands. And then just to highlight as well what Mark was saying, that the central panel can now be resized to help suit the screen that you're working on. So now we've kind of gone through those general bits, we will now take a look at actually running a hypothetical assessment. So navigating to the home page, you can see that you're presented with your introduction page, and as Mark's already described, this introduction page has the option to create a new scenario, or you can import an existing scenario. We'll come back to how to import a scenario later. So for just now, we're just going to add a new scenario. So we can click New Scenario button. You'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, we've been automatically taken from home down to the input. So that's just showing the workflow of the process. And the map on the right-hand side of the screen, when this finishes loading, will show the location of the ecological sites within the UK. We've got some information boxes available on the right-hand side. So for example, we've got our notification center, which currently has got no messages, but for example, when you start running the model, you'll get information about the model, how it's progressing, if files are available to download, that sort of information. You then have your layers tab. The layers tab has got a variety of different options, and these can be toggled on and off, or changed to showing what's being shown on the map. So we'll look at those in a wee bit of detail later. But just as an example, we can turn the ecological sites off or back on again. The information box can be used to provide information about features. So for example, by clicking on this and clicking on a feature, you'll get information about results if we'd already ran a calculation, what habitat sites are contained within this feature, and information about the guidelines of the site. So for example, this is a special area of conservation that has been clicked on. The search tool can be used to find a specific location within the UK. Alternatively, the map can be panned just by dragging and zoomed in and out, for example, using your mouse wheel. And the ruler tool can also be used to measure the distance between locations. So for example, between your point source and a receptor site if you wanted. We'll now look at actually preparing the scenario inputs. So our drop down on the central pane is letting us confirm what scenario we're working on. As we've only just started this, we only have a single scenario. So we can set our scenario name. So we can just call that demonstration, for example. We can then choose what scenario this represents. So for example, are we modelling a reference scenario, which is a set of existing conditions that you want to make all your assessments against? Is this a temporary scenario? So for example, you're trying to mimic the impacts of construction. That's a relatively short-term emission source. Your project scenario, that's looking at assessing the development, for example. Off-site reduction looks at is there any locations where you did have emissions and those are now no longer present. And we've obviously got our in combination assessment to assess the impact of other emission sources on our development. So in this example, we're just going to be looking at a reference source, so an existing source, so we can select that. And the year of the assessment can be assessed from the drop-down menu, selecting from 2018 all the way through to 2030. Once you're happy with that, you can press Save. And you'll see now that we've got the option to provide emission sources, buildings, or diurnal profiles. So we'll make a start and add an emission source. So you'll see currently no emission sources are available in the scenario, so we can press the New Source button to start creating a new source. We can provide a name for our source. Alternatively, we can just leave this as the default name. And then from our sector group dropdown, we need to select which source we're modelling. So in this example, we're going to look at a road transport assessment, so road transport should be selected. The sector group that you select at this stage will dictate what options are available to you later on, for example, with your source characteristics. You're now asked to provide the location of the source that you're assessing. The location of the source can either be provided as a line string of coordinates, for example, or alternatively, you can draw the location of the line source on the map. As I said, in this example, we're just going to look at a hypothetical assessment, and we're going to look at an assessment in Scotland. So what we're going to do, just to demonstrate the search function, is we're going to look for the town of Luss in Scotland. So you'll see now, using that search, we've now zoomed to the town of Luss. And what we're going to do now, making sure that a line source is selected, we are going to draw the location of the road link. So you'll see that there's a base map is included within the AERIUS model, and so we can therefore draw the road source following the location of the road on this base map. So to add a road source, you click and with each of your left-hand mouse tools, and that allows you to add nodes. And when you're finished with the road source, you're happy with what you've created, you can right-click to finish the result. So once we've drawn the road, and if we're happy with the road, we can then move on to provide the source characteristics. The width of the road should be provided in meters. And if the user has any information about the road elevation or the gradient, then this can also be provided within the source characteristics section. AERIUS has got the option to include barrier types, with separate barriers can be specified on either side of the road. We're not going to look at road barriers today, but this is something that we'll discuss in session 2 on Wednesday. The diurnal variation is an important consideration, especially for road sources where there is a large variation in the emissions at different hours of the day and different days of the week. So AERIUS has already got some built-in predefined diurnal profiles. So for example, your sector default profile, which is shown on the map on the screen, these are available for 2018, 2019 and 2020, and those are taken from national statistics. In this case, we are modelling 2022, so the default has been automatically set to 2019, which is the last pre-COVID year. If you're modelling 2018, for example, this would automatically default to the 2018 profile. If you didn't want to use the sector defaults, you could, for example, just use a continuous profile. As you can see on the map, this is updated, so that it's a constant profile across all hours of the day and all days of the week. Alternatively, if you have some local information, say you've got local hourly traffic data for the road that you're modelling and you have the ability to make your own profile, you can choose to apply a custom diurnal profile, and you see that we've now got the option to add new. So I'm going to click on add new and we can just press OK. So we've now got the option to provide a name for our diurnal profile, which will let us be able to select this again quite easily at a later stage. The option to add a custom diurnal profile could be added as a table, for example. So in this table, we have each of the hours of the day and the weekdays, Saturday and Sunday values. And the user can then automatically update these values, and the graphs on the right hand side will start to update. You'll see by making this hour 0 on the weekday a value of 2, we're now getting an error message about the computed total does not match the required amount. So the sum of the weekday values should be 120 and 24 should be the sum of the Saturday and the Sunday values. So for example, by making this 2, the following hour we could make 0, and that then brings our totals back to 120 and 24 and 24. Obviously this is quite a hypothetical scenario, but let's say that instead of you don't want to manually transfer lots and lots of values over. If you've got the information in a CSV file, which hopefully you can see on my screen, you'll see there's a table available which has got the time of the day of the week, so Saturday, Sunday, and the weekday average. So if you've got this result in a table, you can copy this table, and then back in AERIUS, you can go into the raw input and paste this table in. You'll see now that you've got information to say that the table is well formatted and it could be imported. If, for example, you were missing some values, you'll see that you get a warning message to try and alert you to this fact. So if we go back to the raw input and we can delete this because I managed to put 2 on top of each other, which is why we're getting an error. Paste this in, like I say, well formatted, can be imported. We can import this text input. So you'll see that we've got a slight warning message here because the total of our data is not 168, it's 167.99. However, with that, the rounding will just be updated to make it 168. So once we confirm that there is a validation warning, but we're happy with it, we can choose to apply this new diurnal. You'll see now this custom, we now have the option to select this new diurnal we've just created, or alternatively, we can continue to add a new diurnal if we wished. So now that we've added the diurnal profile, we can then look to add information about the traffic direction, speed and emissions data. So the form will automatically start asking for more options as we complete these. So initially we will provide information about the area being modelled. So in this example, we're looking at Scotland, and the road type is rural, not London. So those of you familiar with the emissions factor toolkit, it's a similar sort of information as you're asked on it. You then need to provide information about the traffic that you're going to provide. So for example, are you providing two-way flows? So in this example, it would be the sum of the north and southbound traffic on this road link. Or are you just providing flows from A to B or B to A as the nodes are shown on the map? In this example, we're just going to look at two-way flows, so we can keep that selected. And we now have the option to add a new subsource. Adding a new subsource now opens up this new window, which is allowing us to input information about our traffic activity data and our emissions. I'll start on the custom specification. If, for example, the user wants to provide their own emission factors for NOx and ammonia, then they can do so in this custom specification tab. So as well as providing the emissions per vehicle in grams per kilometre per second, they also need to provide the number of vehicles that are travelling on the road link, and that should be the combined two-way flows as we've selected on the previous line. And we can provide that as either vehicles per 24 hours, per hour, per month, or per year. The default emissions that are used by AERIUS is the CREAM emissions for ammonia and NOx emissions for the emissions factor toolkit. So if we want to use those, we can use the emissions factor toolkit tab. And we can provide information about the link speed, and that should be kilometres per hour. Again, we can provide information about the number of vehicles travelling on the road link. This should be provided either per hour, per 24 hours, per month or year. And then for each of car, taxi, motorcycle, light goods vehicles, heavy goods vehicles and bus and coaches, we should provide the value of vehicles that are travelling along the road link. So just add some numbers for that. So once we've added that, we can close and save our source. So you'll see now that within our emission source, within our road transport network, we now have one source present, and by hovering over that source, we can get a summary of the information that we selected and put in the previous window. We can also see the total kilograms per year of NOx and ammonia for the sources that are currently in the model. If you wanted to add another road source, then you could do so using the new source button within the emission source, but I won't cover that now since I've already shown you how to add one. It's quite useful at this point just to highlight the information that can be gained from the map. So within the map layers, we can look at our road transport network layer, and you can see that the road can be visualized based on, for example, its road type. So at the moment we're modelling our rural, not London road, so you can see this is shown in green. We can also show information about the link speed. So you can see that we said ours was at 80 kilometres per hour, so we've got a yellowy green line. You can look at the traffic volume, either for all vehicles or by individual vehicle types, and these will be colour coded accordingly. If you had road barrier, you'd be able to visualise this, but we don't in this example. And then finally, we can look at the emissions that can be total or for each vehicle. So looking at the back to the scenario input, we're not going to cover buildings in this session, as buildings aren't included in the ADMS model when modelling road sources. Buildings are used in point source calculations exclusively. So if you want to know more about how to add buildings, how to model buildings, then please refer to the user guide, or alternatively in the other breakout room in Tom's room, he will be covering how to add buildings. So you can refer to the recording from his session for details on that. And finally, we've got the option at the bottom of the screen to include the diurnal profile. So as you can see here, we've got the new diurnal that we previously added. You could choose to add your diurnal profiles through this option if you wanted. And then you can see the predefined profiles that are already included within AERIUS for 2018 through to 2020. So now that we have our scenario input defined, we can continue to move down the left-hand side and through the workflow of the process. If we were wanting to look at modelling the concentrations at custom assessment points, then this is the screen where you could add that information. For this example, we're just going to look at ecological sites, so we are not going to do custom assessment points. Custom assessment points will be covered in session 2 on Wednesday with roads, so you can check out that session for details on that. So we'll just jump straight to the calculation jobs. So within the calculation jobs, this is where the user can specify the modelling parameters. So you can provide a name for the calculation job, or you can leave it as default. And then we've got 3 options for the calculation method, as Mark described in the main session. So we've got our formal assessments, that's looking at the concentrations at the ecological sites, and that'll be the hexagons that Mark showed. We've got custom assessment points, so that's the assessment that would look at the assessment points from the previous screen if we were doing them. Or you've got custom assessment, which it allows you to customize the assessment distance rather than just using the 15 kilometers as in the formal assessment. So we're just going to look at a formal assessment and just get the concentrations at our ecological sites. The area being modelled should be selected from the drop-down menu, so we're in Scotland in this example. If we had a project scenario we wanted to assess, this can be selected from the drop-down menu, but in this case we're just looking at a reference, so we're just going to use our reference scenario, so that was our demo 2811. There's no offsite reduction, so again this can be left blank. So we're just going to use the basic options in this assessment. So when we're looking at the basic options, the only information that the user needs to provide is the meteorological site and the year that they want to use. So these can be selected from the drop-down menu. So at the moment there's a limited number of sites. This is something that will be expanded in later versions. So we can just pick the Charlwood site in 2021, for example. And you'll see in the basic options that the values are pre-populated for the user on the Monadnock length, surface albedo, Priestley-Taylor parameter. So that's all preset for the user. If the user wanted to use advanced options, you can provide some more information about these. And if we were looking at a points assessment, you could choose to include plume depletion for NOx, ammonia, or complex terrain. Again, primary FNO2 options can be specified if we were looking at a receptor assessment only. If we were to use advanced options of plume depletion or complex terrain, for example, this would significantly increase the runtime, just so that you're aware of that. So once we're happy with the setup, we can then choose to add a new calculation job if we want to have a second job. As Mark says, you can run 3 jobs at one go. We could calculate the job, which would then show us the calculation results on screen, or alternatively we can export the job. And in that example, if we export the job, the outputs from the model and the model setup and the calculation options would all be exported in a zip folder that would then be available to the user. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at loading a pre-calculated file that was exported using this export job, just to show you how straightforward that is. So if we go back to our home screen, earlier we pressed create new, this time we're just going to import a file. So we can just drag and drop a zip folder. So this is the direct zip folder that came from the export calculation job. And you'll see if we click on the wee arrow, we get some information about what is contained within this file. So it's showing that there's a baseline scenario and it's got 3 emission sources. If there was any errors or warnings, they would be presented in these tabs. If we're happy that there's no errors, warnings, we can then import this scenario. This will then take us to the input page once this imports. And we have our baseline reference. So this is our the file that we looked at. If we have a look at our emission sources, you can now see in the road transport network, we're still modelling the same location, but we now have 3 emission sources. By clicking on the emission source, that will highlight on the map which emission source has been selected, or by double clicking, that will zoom to the source of interest. When I look to the calculation jobs, you'll see that, as I say, the calculation settings are all pre-populated based on what was included in the export, and we can then choose to calculate those results. Once you start calculation, you do have the option to cancel the calculation. Alternatively, you'll now see that the results button is available to click on, and you'll see that for a calculation, you now get information about what stage in the process your calculation is at, and it will start showing preliminary model results as they complete. I'm hoping, so this is just the exact same example as we've just run, but with the results pre-populated, just so that we don't need to wait for a couple of minutes for those to finish. So the summary tab provides a summary for each of the ecological sites within the 15-kilometre radius, what the max NOx and ammonia concentrations are, and what's the max deposition at each of those sites. The scenario results tab can provide further information about those sites. So from our drop-down menu, we can select which scenario is being modelled. In our example, we just have a reference case, so that's only one option available. And again, our results drop-down can be used to select whether it was a scenario contribution, or if we had a project, we could look at the project contribution, process contribution. The pollutant menu can be used to select whether you want to show deposition, NOx or ammonia concentrations, and the map will automatically update to show the selected pollutant values. The percentage critical load per designated site is not available for a reference case because we don't have a project to assess in this scenario. Our distribution then shows distribution per designated site. What's the deposition in this example? And you can see you get a nice chart showing this. Clicking on the little square will zoom to the site that's being looked at. The markers tab shows for each site where's the highest total for deposition in this example, and then the maximum contribution at the location of those sites. And then finally, the habitat and species tab shows for each of the habitats what species are located in it and what's the maximum contribution to that habitat based on our reference scenario. So we'll try and have a look at some NOx concentrations just to illustrate the hexagons that Mark had described about how these are change based on your zoom level and how you can get more resolved hexagons closer to the emission source when you're zoomed in. Depending on the number of hexagons to be made, this can take a few minutes or to load. See, we're just checking back, so we're now getting to 4 out of 5 on the original job that we started, just to give you an idea of the speed. Concentrations aren't playing ball. Maybe if you live somewhere with faster internet, that'll work better for you. But what you would see by changing concentrations and by zooming in, as Mark showed in the main session, we would have more dense hexagons located closer to our road source, and farther away from the road source, the hexagons would be greater spaced. So once you've got your results, you could then choose to export these. So I think Mark already went through these in the main session. So you can export just the input files by selecting input files and select your email address. You can export the full calculation job. Again, you can specify which job you want to export, what's the project reference or offsite reduction scenario, again providing an email address. And as was described in our main session, the NCA export is currently under construction, and the aim of this would be that it would be a formal assessment tool, and a PDF would be produced at the end that could be digitally signed and included with your assessments.